Hey, I'm just quickly jumping in here before we get into today's conversation. If you're enjoying the podcast, please take a moment to like and subscribe. Click that little bell button to get notified when the new episodes come out. And if you'd like to support Paramount Importance even further, please check out our website, paramountimportance.com. We've got some awesome merch there. They've got these cool shirts, these cool hats, all environmentally friendly and the highest quality we could go. It generally helps us keep on doing what we are doing, spreading the word of science, inspiring a whole bunch more people. It really helps us out. But without further ado, let's get into today's episode. Let's go. Paramount Importance. Why do you think people get so confused with pediatricians with people who research feet?
I'm not sure.
Yeah. I mean, I guess unless you're a parent and you've had kids that have had to go to a pediatrician, you probably don't even know. You go to your GP, but you know a pediatrician when you have something your kid needs that the GP can't give them, right?
Yeah, so then you're aware of it. But I was speaking to my friend this morning on the phone, and I was telling him who I was interviewing, and he works in social work, so he'll be working alongside, well, not alongside, but like dealing with pediatricians, and he was telling me that like so many people when he first gets to speak to them about things mix them up with podiatrists.
Yeah.
And so that's why, yeah. And like that's when it was maybe one of the first thoughts, like for a second, that was like, oh, like when I saw that, but obviously I hadn't realized what it was. But
it's even harder if you're a pediatric podiatrist, right?
Are there people
Well,
that do that?
There must be pediatric podiatrists.
Yeah, I'm sure there are some. They would have some at the Children's Hospital.
Yeah. There we go.
Yeah.
Well, let's start broad and then we'll narrow in both of your work in immunology and infectious disease with a focus of pediatrics and newly born infants. Can you explain to us what do you do?
I can get started.
Yeah,
So I'm a pediatrician. So I specialized into that area of medicine looking after children, and then after doing that, further specialized into newborn intensive care. So we really support babies that have any trouble after delivery, whether this is because they are simply born too early. There are varying degrees of being born early, from just a little bit to extremely early, just at the limits of where we can support newborn babies, or babies that are born, close to or even at term, but have underlying conditions that make them really unwell, requiring a lot of support. So that's really what newborn intensive care looks after.
Yeah. Right. And I'm not a pediatrician, so I'm a basic researcher, immunologist. And my training was actually in asthma and allergy research. But my first postdoc position was at the British Columbia Children's, Women's and Infants Health Hospital. And I worked on cystic fibrosis, which affects kids and adults, but particularly in childhood. And then I got to work with some kids who came into the hospital who had unknown immune deficiencies. They were getting infections with no real cause. And so that really piqued my interest about understanding the childhood immune system, how it develops. And that led to an interest in terms of then if you think, well, if childhood is the risk period where things start to happen, where is the risk period in childhood? And you just go down and down and down until Tobias's world where things get really interesting, really underdeveloped, and that's where a lot of the risk is. The death happens in the neonatal period, the infection happens, the vaccine science needs to be there. So from an immunological point of view, that pediatric newborn space is really interesting. It's also, I mean, it's not depressing. It's just surprisingly devoid of work, right? We're always amazed just how few publications there are in the area. I mean, Tobias is very good with this, with his international networks, but you probably know most of the people who do what you do internationally, and they work together. So that's the other thing about pediatricians. I've worked with adult researchers and clinicians. I've worked in other areas. The pediatricians are just nice people. They're good to work with. They get along mostly, and they work collegially. So it's a good place to be too.
Right. Okay. Yeah. Why do you think it's devoid of research? Is it because research, like human, like especially babies, it's quite a hard topic to do any research in, right? You can't really replicate it with other animals or do
You can to a degree. I think part of the problem is that neonatology, so newborn intensive care, is a relatively young discipline. So it's really only been in existence for maybe a good 30 years. So compared to other subspecialties in adult medicine, it's relatively young. We haven't been able to support new preterm babies, especially for such a long time. And for many companies who, develop medicines, for example, it's very unattractive, just like pregnancy. All they see is risk, not the humongous benefit that can be had. So there is a lot less investment into research into that area because people are concerned that if they're seen to be conducting research in newborn babies and something was to go wrong, that they would only get the fallout from that, but not the benefit. So just to put it into perspective, in the last, say, 30 odd years that neonatology exists, there has exactly been one medication developed specifically for newborn babies. One.
Really?
Everything else is a hand-me-down from adults.
Whoa. What is that one medication?
It's surfactant to treat the immature lung.
Right.
That is the only medication. Everything else is just handed down from pediatrics or adult medicine, and oftentimes without much data. It's just that's what we have. That's what we got to use.
And that was work developed here in WA, wasn't it? In the sheep project. I think they worked on surfactants, or at least the lung development stuff.
They did, but much of that work actually came out of Europe, where the companies are still that produce most of the surfactant that's used worldwide.
Yeah, I think the other issue is that the kind of babies that Tobias looks after, they get an amazing level of care. I mean, the NICU is an amazing place. If you looked at the NICU from an intensive point of view, it's highly organised, lots of equipment, lots of technology, and the care level is, I think the best care that any human gets, right? But the majority of infants are not in that kind of setting. They're in low middle income countries, they're in resource poor areas, and where a lot of the burden is, and I just don't think that's attractive to drug companies either, right? There's not much interest to go and solve preterm birth in sub-Saharan Africa. There's not a lot of money there. And so I think this idea that you've got to solve problems that also have to have low-tech solutions is really critical for this population. It's got to be pragmatic. It's got to work. And it's got to be translatable, right? Transferable.
Yeah. No, I agree. And that's part of the ethos that we've been, holding ourselves to in our work, that it has to be generalizable and practically applicable and not exclusively in highly resourced settings. To put it into perspective, and I'm glad you brought up the global perspective, is that, in Australia, there's about 27,000 preterm births per year. Yeah, so it's still a high number. People don't know. About 8 to 10% of births occur early, and that means more than 3 weeks before the due date. But it can be all the way down to 17 weeks before the due date. That's how early we do support preterm babies, fairly routinely. But from a global perspective, there are 15 million preterm births. And the vast majority of those are, as Andrew points out, in low and middle income countries, predominantly in sub-Saharan Africa and Southeast Asia.
Right.
So where funding is much more scarce than it is here. So even if you proposed interventions, if they cost a lot of money, it will not happen.
And so you're working in the research part to develop things to be able to help in those areas?
Yeah, I think so, yeah.
We do. And I mean, there's a lot of work that needs to be done, but our focus area has been infection. And we're not talking about sort of trivial infections like just a cold that, that are fairly insignificant. We are talking about bloodstream infections, sepsis. That's the focus of our research. And so pretty much all we do is centered around that, whether this is diagnostics, diagnosing it earlier and more accurately, trialing new prophylactic interventions to ideally prevent it if we can, or in those cases where it cannot be prevented, to identify new treatments that, on top of the care we already provide, may help to improve survival and long-term outcomes.
Why is it that area of focus? Why are you choosing that?
I think because we've both had a long-standing interest in immunology, and from an immunological perspective, newborn sepsis is the most critical condition that you want to improve and reduce the burden of.
Yeah. And it's still a problem even with that intensive care environment in Australia, sepsis is still a major problem because it's poorly understood. It's also an enigma because the kinds of infections that the preterm babies get are not organisms that would normally cause disease in even a term baby. So if you fast forward in pregnancy 4 or 5 more weeks, you just don't see those infections. In fact, the bacteria that cause the infections in the preterm are just normal bacteria that you actually expect to find on the surface and in the gut of a healthy baby. So you've got this really interesting, from an immunologist point of view, a really interesting shift in how a body handles being exposed to the microbial world, that in one baby, 4 or 5 weeks later is fine and is actually necessary and part of healthy life, and 4 weeks earlier is detrimental and can be fatal. And so you're thinking, what happens in that 4 or 5 weeks? Like, what is it that is different? Can we understand it? And if we can understand it, then we understand more about how we all interact with our microbes. You know, if we can understand what the immune system learns and figures out in that period of time, we might uncover a lot of interactions that might have ramifications beyond the neonatal period, like in elderly life and childhood. So I think that's part of the drive. I would say that we spend a lot of time, we've been working together for 15 years, more than 15 years now, probably. We spend a lot of time on the basic research side, just asking questions like, you know, what is sepsis and why do babies get it and those kind of things. And we spent a good bit of the work cracking that puzzle. We didn't get close to solving it. I think we're still no closer to solving it, although we've got some good ideas. But I think we had a shift in our thinking probably about maybe 8-9 years ago, where we were a bit frustrated. We were going through the grant cycles, trying to get more funding for this basic research, coming up against this resistance against trying to fund neonatal work. It's just not attractive enough. And so I guess we had a bit of a pact. I remember where it was JB O'Reilly's. We went for a beer one afternoon. We had a bit of a bruising year, went for a Guinness, and then we're walking back and we just thought, we got to do something different. Like, we got to stop this cycle. And then we made a pact to just trim down to what we could have impact in and pick some things to focus in. I think we picked 3 things. And we thought, well,
What were they?
I think they were sort of skin therapeutics with coconut oil. I'm sure we'll talk about that. One was a leading antimicrobial peptide that we had been collaborating on with this Australian scientist who was in Vancouver. And the other one was the petoxyphylline, the brain protecting drug that Tobias has been working on. And we just thought, well, let's put ourselves to the test, and in 5 years, let's try and make at least one of these things change and happen. And we'll judge ourselves in that time frame about what we've actually shifted. So then it was a shift from let's stop trying to understand the problem to let's try and just pragmatically find solutions to the problem. And I think that made a big difference. Like, it's changed how we've worked. It's been a lot of fun, and I think we've progressed probably 2 out of those 3.
Yeah.
And one of the ones we didn't progress, someone else picked up and has been running with as well. But it's, you know, I still miss the basic research side too. I think we still lapse back into, we've got to do some more basic research, and we still do a little bit of that. But I think it's the reverse now. We put the translation first. If it can't be translated or it won't translate, there's no point understanding the mechanism. Otherwise, you end up doing a lot of research that just doesn't go anywhere. You spend a lot of time and a lot of money that we don't have to do it right. So, I think, it's an interesting shift. It's worked for us.
Yeah, look, it's certainly been quite the journey, because if you want to know whether things work, you have to run clinical trials, which is what I really enjoy doing. Ideally backed by good good basic science. So that's what we've been doing, and we've been lucky to get funding for out of the 3 ideas, and we have run large clinical trials and internationally with lots of participants. So both of these trials have had well over 1,000 babies included, and we're now coming to the end of both of these trials, and we'll soon be analyzing the data. So that's a really exciting time now to see how things may have worked out.
Right. Well, let's jump at that. I'm going to first say what is sepsis, just so we all know what we're talking about, and then can we talk about? You said 2 of the 3 you've been working on, and close to well, let's talk about one of them. Would it be the coconut one, and I'm assuming, is it the brain?
Mm-hmm.
That's the other one. The 2 of the 3 that you're working on.
Yeah.
Okay. Let's talk about what is sepsis. So we got the background, and then I think that was the one that will be relating with coconut oil.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, let's dive into that.
So in newborn, sepsis is still defined as a bloodstream infection that causes an inflammatory response by the baby. And it's typically the combination of the infection and the response it triggers in the baby that makes the baby so unwell. Yeah, and the mortality, depending on which organism it is still quite high.
Organism,
the pathogen, the microbes that cause infection.
Mm-hmm.
Andrew already alluded to that, especially in the tiniest babies. There can be normal skin bacteria that in you or I, we all carry them on our skin, but to us they're pretty harmless, and they belong there and they have a role to play. But in preterm babies especially, they can cause infections. So about 2/3 of the infections we see isolated from the blood of the sick baby, we find these skin bacteria, and then the other 1/3 are bacteria that you and I would also fall ill with, and they were typically more serious. So if it's the more serious bacteria, then mortality, the risk of a baby dying is 25-30%. It's quite high. It's still one of the most common causes of death in the neonatal intensive care unit. If it's the skin organisms, usually the risk of dying is lower, but it still carries long-term implications. And we know that survivors of sepsis do have a much higher risk of having long-term developmental problems because of the inflammation that can harm the developing brain.
Right. So what do you mean by developing problems? Like what kind of?
Yeah, so the risk, for example, of not meeting the milestones in the way that you would expect a normal child to meet them as they grow up, and it can be really hard to predict that. Oftentimes we simply have to wait and see the baby or the young child in follow-up clinic as they grow up to identify any problems earlier. But we know very clearly that those who've survived sepsis are at least twice twice the risk of developing any developmental problems along the way. So that's why that was one of the interest areas, to identify a medication that we could administer concurrently with antibiotics and the normal supportive therapy for an unwell baby, to see whether dampening of the inflammatory response may allow them to survive without developing disability. So that's a really important trial. That's closed recruitment, and we're just finishing the follow-up, where babies are then all examined once they are young children, around the age 2 years.
Right.
Yeah, I will add, and this is something maybe you can comment on too, and we won't talk about it because that's another area around diagnostics that we work in. But it's a great question, because what is sepsis? And the answer is, I reckon we don't know. We've got a definition in adults, which is a consensus definition, which is it's an infection that leads to inflammation and organ dysfunction. There's no consensus definition for neonatal sepsis. No agreement anywhere in the world about what it actually is. The working definitions, like Tobias talked about, the blood infection and inflammation, are pragmatic, but that probably undersells the problem. And so, maybe it would help if you explain, what does a septic baby look like to you, and just how difficult that baby is to identify when you see them, and how even colleagues of yours in the same NICU won't agree on whether the baby is septic or not. So, I mean, that would be really useful, I think, to explain.
Yeah, the trouble, especially in neonates, of course, they can't talk to us. They can't tell us what's wrong, right? So observation is very important, and we typically have monitoring leads on the baby, so we can monitor the heart rate, the oxygen saturation, the breathing rate, and of course look at them. But the particular challenge is that there is a significant overlap between what babies can show just because they're newly born and how they're transitioning from that life inside mum to the life in the outside world. Or for preterm babies, some of the signs that may indicate sepsis could simply be related to the preterm birth too. So there is not one or even a combination of signs that would make it definite that the baby is septic just by looking at them. So we have to resort to some imperfect diagnostic tests, shall we say. One of them is the blood culture, where you draw a certain amount of blood, put it in a blood culture bottle and incubate it at 37 degrees and wait whether you find any bacteria. It's a good test, but it's an imperfect test. It certainly doesn't detect 100% of the cases, and that's why many biomarkers have been studied, but none of them actually works as well as it would have to allow you to be certain and really support the decision of whether you need to use antibiotics or not, or when to stop them. So that's a real challenge, and I think that's what Andrew alluded to.
Yeah, and I think that's important, because you've got this clinical uncertainty, you've got an unwell baby, we have really imperfect tests, and then not appropriately, someone like Tobias, on suspicion of sepsis, they treat, right? So they have to, because you don't want to risk, that mortality that you see with sepsis, which means a lot of babies get treated without actually having sepsis, but that's just the reality. And until we get those better tests, we really are in the two camps of, let's at least try and do something to minimize the impact, which is, the brain impact, the development impact, or even better, let's go downstream and prevent. If we can prevent them in the first place, then that clinical confusion becomes less of a problem. And so I think that kind of reflects a lot about that three focus or three foci for us, in terms of, let's work downstream in prevention, let's work upstream in terms of trying to prevent the inevitable, because it's going to happen. And in the interim, we'll try and fix diagnostics as the eventual goal, to get a test that can just tell you exactly, this baby needs to be treated now, stop on that one. So I think that reflects, and I don't know whether we got there deliberately or just by accident, or maybe that's just how the field is.
I think it was an evolution over time, really. The more time and effort you spend on the topic, the clearer it becomes where the critical areas are, I think.
Yeah.
Right. How did you go with, ethically, when you're saying you're running these clinical trials with babies? How does that get through? And does a mother have to give consent? Obviously,
Oh yeah, absolutely. So, it depends a little bit on the scenario and what the risk profile of the intervention is. But in principle, of course, all the trials, all the work we do, in fact, where we either treat babies or obtain blood samples or other samples from babies, all go with informed consent. Yeah. And that's generally the right way. So all of these projects we run have been approved by the responsible ethical committees and so on. So that's always the pathway. Taking informed consent and letting the parents know what's happening is integral part of what we do every day anyway. So for most of the studies, that is the case. The coconut oil trial in particular, because we had gained so much experience locally at King Edward, treating literally a few thousand babies already. We know it's a very low risk intervention. So that one followed, shall we say, a more contemporaneous approach in running the trial, where not individual babies but entire neonatal intensive care units were randomized, and in fact that one ran with a waiver of consent. So that was very appropriate for that particular intervention. And also had great efficiencies in that we could run a trial with many babies in a very short period of time to answer this very important question, whether this intervention may help or not, because that's also in the interest of the families, of course. And for our projects, we've always involved families with lived experience in the design to ensure that from the outset we would actually meet what their important questions are and how to improve care for their babies, imagining they were in the same situation again, or projecting it forwards for families who may be affected by preterm birth in the future.
Yeah. Is there a risk with doing these clinical trials when it happens, or treating a baby? Like, is there, and you mentioned before, like you're treating some babies that don't need it. Is there any risk for those babies, or is it just they're getting treatment when they don't need it?
I think, look, preterm birth comes with a high risk, full stop. Whether or not you are in a clinical trial, that it is a high risk area. Generally, we know that patients who participate in trial, whether they are newborns, children, or adults, do better than patients who are not enrolled in clinical trials, simply because it adds an element of structure, protocol adherence, oversight, monitoring to the care that is not as much part of routine care. So in general, participation in the clinical trial is a good thing. We know just whichever trial it is, patients typically do better than with routine care alone, even if they receive placebo.
Yeah.
So that's interesting.
Absolutely. I mean, and to the point where that can be a problem, actually, where just the involvement in a trial can be so powerful that it can really hide what you're trying to see, right? You can just have the effect of the staff helping the trial participants get better. But I would say that the oversight, you can imagine the oversight in the neonatal work is another level of scrutiny. So you're not going to get access to infants in a NICU to do stuff unless you've demonstrated a lot of safety down the line. And in fact, it's basically realistic that it will go through adults, animals, probably children, and which is one of the reasons why we said at the start that there's only that one medication that's really been developed. That's probably because of this need to have to go through the other populations to get to the risk population.
I would say it would be probably the most scrutinized science in the world.
Yeah, probably only comparable to what happens in pregnancy.
Yeah.
Nobody wants to go near pregnant women either because they only see risk, right?
Yeah.
It's changing slowly. I think over the last 10 years we have observed a really welcome change. There are now more trials for pregnant women as well, especially immunization trials, where the outcome is not to protect the mother herself necessarily, but more so being able to transfer protection to the unborn baby so that they are born with protection already on board.
And it works.
And it works.
And
it works, and it's safe.
And the vets have been doing it for decades in pregnant animals. So, but again, you need an evidence base to really put you in that space. You can't just get there by accident. You've got to really work to get to that space before anything is trialed. And I think that's built into what we do in terms of definitely the ethics and safety of what we do is first in mind, right? We don't do anything unless we think it's going to be safe and ethical to do.
Yeah,
and because it won't translate if it's not. Right?
No, that's right, and you won't get that. But just to maybe give you one example for this trial with a drug called pentoxifylline, which is a really decades-old medication that is known to modulate the inflammatory response. And not only was it already known to be safe, and there was data from newborn babies, including preterm infants, but in addition to that, at each participating site, the trial was reviewed by the local ethics committee. So in total, we had 25 ethics committees review it. So you can be pretty certain that if there were issues, at least one of them should have identified if,
Yeah.
if they
25
were,
with their own 25 opinions. And
yeah, and every committee has numerous members, right?
Yeah.
So it went through a lot of scrutiny to
Well,
to get there.
For people listening, in comparison to when we do our marine studies, we have one ethics permit. We have to get other permits.
Yeah.
But they're not animal ethics permits. We only have to do it once.
Yeah.
Send it off, and not 25. That is very, very high. Is it too early to talk about some of the results?
Only to say, yes, it is too early. We don't have the results just yet. For the one trial with the coconut oil skincare, we've only just received the data, so a little bit too early. And the other trial has.
What is that trial? So that's because we keep going.
The coconut oil trial?
Yes.
Yeah, okay, let me talk about that. So that's really an evolution of the work that we've done over the last 10 years. And the problem we identified was that we had no means of safely delivering skincare to babies. There was no intervention, no oil, no emollient, no lotion that actually had been tested to a sufficient level to know that it's safe. And then in 2015, some colleagues in a middle income country conducted a high quality trial, simply adopting the care that had been going on in particular in Southeast Asia, where coconut oil or coconut trees are endemic. They have been using that for neonatal skin care for millennia. Clearly not something that we would have done in Australia or in Europe before.
Before we jump into that, why is the neonatal skincare an important organ to look after?
Look, it's our largest organ, really. If you count the number of cells and the body surface area, it covers. It's one of the key elements how newborn babies interact with the outside world. There's also the gut, of course. There's also the respiratory tract, the lungs, the airways. But the skin is one of those three key elements how we interact. And essentially immediately after birth, all babies who are born from, in most circumstances, at least clean, if not sterile environment, are colonized with all sorts of bacteria that are in the environment. It's just what happens.
And on mum
and on mum, in a normal scenario, a normal delivery, what happens afterwards? Baby gets put on mum's chest, is dried, is kept warm, and then typically within, the next minutes to half an hour starts rooting and starts latching onto the breast and starts the first breastfeed. That's what is normal. Okay. Oftentimes we interrupt that process, especially when babies are born preterm, right? We try to do skin to skin, can't always happen, and then babies are put in incubators. So there's quite a disruption to that normal process, which also means that preterm babies have a much higher chance of being colonized also with more dangerous bacteria that may be hosted in the NICU environment rather than acquiring those beneficial normal skin bacteria that are hosted on mum or dad, and that can be a challenge. In addition, particularly for the preterm babies, their skin is a lot thinner, a lot more immature in its function, and not really designed, especially at the earliest gestation that we can support, to be even exposed to air. It dries out very quickly. It cracks. It becomes inflamed, and those visible or invisible cracks in the skin structure can allow bacteria that are resident on the skin to gain access to the bloodstream and cause infection. And the scenario is typically the skin is fine after birth, and then within days the skin condition deteriorates, and then another several days later we see the highest incidence of sepsis. Yeah, so there is a certain sequence. And what the colleagues showed was that providing, in a randomized trial, coconut oil skincare substantially reduced the baby's risk of acquiring sepsis. And they in fact, were the first to study this intervention in fairly immature preterm babies. So we then took that on and said, we have nothing to provide to our preterm babies. This seems like a very safe, potentially beneficial intervention that we should try. So we did that, and it was very well received.
It was the COSI-1 trial.
That was the COSI-1 trial. That's right. And COSI stands for coconut oil to improve skin integrity in preterm babies. And that was a resounding success. It was the first trial that I've been part of that finished ahead of schedule, because people were so keen to participate.
Right.
So we finished faster than we thought we would, which was quite exciting.
And the staff loved it too. And I think a good story about when Tobias started leading this work, the formulation of the coconut oil has changed. Initially, it was in little jars, and the nurses liked putting it on their hands because it actually improved their hand skin.
Mm-hmm.
And so the jars would sometimes go walkabout. There were recipes popping up for coconut oil in brownies, and so it became a bit of a sort of a surrogate for all kinds of things in the NICU, right?
Yeah.
To the point where you had to change formulation a bit to make it a bit more controlled and.
Yeah, and it wasn't without its challenges either, because there's a bit of a learning curve to using it, because it is an oil, and coconut oil is solid if it's less than 25 degrees. It becomes solid, and then it liquefies again as it gets a bit warmer. Fortunately, most of the time in the NICU we're at a warmer temperature anyway. But applying that to the baby, you can imagine that if you get too close to the attached monitoring leads, they may actually lift off.
Oh, yeah.
And you can't put it too close to a dressing because it will seep under, and it's a very effective adhesive remover.
Yes.
So that certainly was a bit of a learning curve. But then within a few months, those reports and, shall we say, occasional complaints that it's interfering with what we were doing completely subsided as people got used to using it in, shall we say, the appropriate way. And now nobody even speaks about it anymore. It's just what we do. So that was rapidly translated into routine care, because we had shown that it definitely improves and maintains good skin condition.
What is it that's about the coconut oil? Like what's in the coconut oil that's
I think for the skin condition, firstly, it is an oil. You can probably improve skin condition with other oils as well, but skin condition alone doesn't tell the full story. There had been trials in the late 1990s, early 2000s that used mineral oil derivatives that also did improve skin condition, but unfortunately at the same time, they increased the risk of infection. So just improving skin condition alone is not enough, and you literally have to look beyond the skin appearance, and you have to also understand what it does to the resident bacteria on the skin, because while it wasn't tested in this other trial that identified the risk, it is likely that it had an influence on the microbiome. So the all bacteria taken together that you find on the skin, it was shifted in an unfavorable way, and that's where the specific composition of coconut oil plays a role, because some of its fatty acids are well known to have antimicrobial capacity, so they have a welcome, and they cause a welcome shift in the bacterial spectrum that you find on the skin.
Yeah, and I think it's worth mentioning because it's probably a story that we probably have forgotten, but it's actually a big driver of where we're at now. And so Tobias ran the COSI trial, first time that coconut oil had been run in a tertiary setting in a rich country or a resource-rich country. Successful. King Eddie's now has it routine on the back of that trial. So every baby born, 30 weeks? 30 weeks?
Yeah, under 30 weeks, but certainly, babies have dry skin, they get it too. And collectively, we've treated well over 3,000 babies. So it's not, to us, it's really routine now.
So it works.
Only for 3,000.
But it's only in the King Eddie's NICU.
It's only for the small babies.
It's only just WA that gets it in those babies, right? It's because it hasn't been extended out. Again, this kind of evidence base and risk base. But Tobias ran the trial. It was successful. The story is really powerful. He submits an abstract to present at the Pediatric Society of the US Pediatric Society, right?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Biggest pediatric meeting in the world. He wasn't even allowed to take the work as a poster. Not even allowed to present it in a poster form. Essentially banned, right? Well, effectively censored from talking about it.
What?
Because, we rallied and you wrote to the organisers and said, this is ridiculous. It's a trial in a tertiary centre. It's been done properly. It's been published. No, they didn't know what to make of it, right? And I think we suspect it was because it fits in this natural space of therapeutics. It's not really a drug. It's not really a food. It's this kind of weird sort of hybrid. So they didn't know what to do with it. And we were stung by that. I think really frustrated and stung, thinking, what is going on? This is nuts. But it was a good lesson for us. Like, no. This is just, the work we have to do. We've got to start now to do the science behind this, because they're not going to listen and understand us until we show them the work behind it. So that's when we started to crack what's in coconut oil, right? So do the scientific research about the components, show the antimicrobial activity, try and do some wound healing stuff that we've been doing as well, just to be able to counter that. And I think the irony is now we've been so successful, I think, in doing that the COSI-2 trial that you'll talk about, the Americans funded and not Australia. So the science got through, the Americans flipped their mentality, or at least the funding bodies did, and then we got the US to fund the whole second trial, which shows you that you've got to, you've got to be able to bring people along with the science as well. You can't just translate something. It's got to have enough work behind it too, which is, it's been a learning curve for us as well.
Yeah, it certainly hasn't been a smooth sailing all along.
Yeah, you're naive when you go in thinking we've cracked something that's going to be such an easy solution, and then you're thinking, yeah, wow, there's way more work to do. We've been really lucky that we were part of a centre called the West Pharma Centre for Vaccine and Infectious Disease at the Kids Institute, with a lot of our friends who we'd been working alongside for many years, and they gave us a seed fund, I think $16,000 to do some of that early work. So it was some of the work was at Murdoch, some of the work was with a collaborator at ECU, and just to start to pull apart coconut oil. And it turns out coconut oil's actually really hard to work with and pull apart. It's got some real interesting chemical properties that make it difficult to understand. So we haven't fully cracked it apart yet.
Interesting you say that. I did a podcast with Garth Maker, talking about toxicology, and he talked about coconut oil, how hard that is to, when he does the toxicology reports of the studies, like pulling apart the oils was very hard.
Yeah.
As well.
I'll have to talk to him about that, because, it's been a challenge and it hasn't been smooth sailing, but we've got some surrogates of that, I think, how it works. But yeah.
And even though $16,000 for something that could be, is life-changing to...
Over time, of course, we got some more funding, but that was the first sort of specific bit of funding to help us conduct the work, the basic work that was also required.
Look, this is true of everything in science, that like those little pots of money are what actually makes science happen. Like you think the big trial that gets funded by the US, whatever it was, $400,000 US for the big trial, is the answer. That's the end point. The answer is the $16,000 pot of money. So the citizen donors of science, charities, those fundraising efforts at a community base are the difference between science happening and not happening. It's reality. A small pot of money will kickstart a whole program of research, and that was true for us, right? It definitely kicked off the whole next phase of COSI, and where we've got to, right? So yeah, look, it's underestimated, but it's true.
Right. So that's part of telethon as well. So that's where a lot of this money.
Well, this was actually West Farmers. So in this case, it was the West Farmers Corporation who set up the centre and gave the centre their funding, and then the centre basically set up a seed funding program. Okay. So the centre was smart enough to think we can spend all this money in fancy equipment or big programs, or we can put small pockets up and let people apply for ideas, which we've benefited from several times. But yeah, look, like Tobias said, it's snowballed into a lot more funding, and we've had some really generous donations and funds since then, since the story's grown. But I think I look back to that pivot point where I don't know how you funded COSI. Well, how did you fund COSI, the original trial?
The original trial, that was actually funded by the Women's and Infants Research Foundation.
Initial fund.
So that was local funding.
Wouldn't have been much money either, would it?
No, that wasn't. It was essentially the ability to employ a research nurse.
Yeah.
And to buy the coconut oil supplies. Yeah. So it wasn't.
So when again talking about types of coconut, like there's so many formulas of making it. What are the like? Is this the coconut oil that we can just go to the Coles?
Yeah, that's a very good question. So in first off, putting together the tests to actually analyze coconut oil, because that's not something that's done routinely, right? You have to develop specific tests, specifically looking also for components that are bioactive and contribute to the antimicrobial activity. They are not tests that are in existence, so you have to put them together first with collaborators, and then we literally screened, I don't know how many different oils.
Yeah, I went to the shops and health food stores, and I just bought a whole pile of different coconut oils, organic and commercial and food products. I just bought everything I could find. I think I bought 20 or something.
Yeah,
I get
quite amazing. His office looked funny with all the coconut oil.
Yeah, I tested them all. I tasted. I also did the taste test on them too.
Yeah,
and I came across this thing called jungle coffee, which is black coffee with a couple of spoonfuls of coconut oil in. Apparently, the bodybuilders use it because it keeps you in ketosis.
Oh, really?
So it's actually not a bad coffee, actually, a coffee with 2 spoonfuls of coconut oil in. So I can also give you the quality measurement on the coconut oil too, which was really interesting because, the real expensive organic stuff smelt fantastic, didn't always taste the best. Sometimes the cheap stuff actually tasted better. But when we came to analyze it with the chemical composition, it was an absolute random process. Like you could not predict which oil was going to be the top for some of these markers and which one was going to be the bottom. There were some surprises. What we learnt was that, the old saying, oils ain't oils, saying that oils ain't oils.
Yeah, I would compare it to wine. It really depends on which particular species of coconut trees they come from. How mature were they when they were harvested? How quickly were they? Was the oil extracted once the nuts were harvested?
The process for extracting.
The process for extracting. So that all plays a role. Where exactly did it grow? What was the climate? How warm was it? How much sun did they get? All these things matter. So I guess the wine thing, while not comparing apples and apples, it's still a good analogy.
Yep.
So a single brand could be so inconsistent as well then.
Yeah, that's something we can talk about. That's a challenge too for how you turn this stuff into routine, like medicine basically, because it's a natural product and it varies from batch to batch. And so that's part of, trying to tame this thing as a potential pharmaceutical is the work behind that.
Where is it? Like, is there, how am I going to phrase this? I guess I want to try to find out, like, is there the particular brand or type, or is there research being done? It's like, if it's cultured in this way, it is the most beneficial type of oil. Or is it is there an area?
I think we're not quite there yet. I think what we can say though is letting them mature on the tree and fall down rather than picking them prematurely is certainly a benefit. A quick turnaround time from picking them or picking them off the ground and turning them into oil is of benefit. But we haven't nailed down all the details.
But you can imagine then that bit of knowledge actually reflects about some of the places that do that kind of processing. So the fact that it's picked ripe off the tree, it takes not a very long time to get to a processing facility, means it's probably done in a small village where there's a co-op and there's a group of farmers who are pulling the coconuts in from different plantations, because no one farmer is going to have all the press and the gear. So what we have found is that the places that kind of replicate that co-op sustainable growth of coconuts where they're working together seems to be where the quality also sits.
Yeah.
And we will say this is virgin coconut oil. So we found also that the oil that is unprocessed, straight out of the coconut, as fast as you can get it out from this ripest coconut, that seems to be, the things we track, that seems to be one of the best predictors. It's also regional too, right? So there's some parts of the world where it seems to be ingrained in the oil, whether that's endemic species, I don't know.
I would say that probably go back to the microbiome that's in the soil.
It could be nutrients in the soil, and and there's a massive body of work that we've talked about, pipe dream at some point, closing the loop and understanding the plantation side. And you could see, the dream would be to have our own plantation of coconuts.
Working with any agriculturists?
We've talked to a couple. Yeah. We had a guy we spoke to a while ago who was one of our community reference people who actually happened to be an agricultural scientist. And
that's correct. The challenge is that surprisingly in Australia, despite the climate, there are no commercial coconut plantations. They are all off in the Pacific region usually,
or India and
or the subcontinent, but nothing on Australian soil where you would hope you could collaborate more closely or even have some control over exactly how it's done. Maybe that's something for the future.
Yeah. What coconut oil are you using in like you said it's regular routine now? So
that's right.
You found something.
We were very lucky, and that was just fortuitous. When we were planning the first trial, we looked long and hard to identify ideally Australian companies that would work with us and had a steady supply of high quality oil. And we just happened to work with one company out of Queensland who get their oil off Fiji. And it is just like Andrew described, it's a small co-op type company that produces very high quality virgin coconut oil that is then packaged in Australia. And that's what we have stuck with since then. So that's now 10 years because they've always produced really, really high quality, very consistent, especially for a natural product. And they were way ahead of the game compared to other manufacturers, that they always submitted all their batches routinely to quite rigorous testing, which is unusual, but it was just done for their peace of mind. So we already had some good starting data to know this is clean, this is really high quality, this is fresh, and just very well done.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, so you've found that the coconut oil makes a big impact. What happens next? How do you start getting this integrated into general practice?
Yeah, I think we're eagerly awaiting the results of the trial. So this trial, the second large one that we conducted in Australia and New Zealand with 17 of the big tertiary units in these two countries.
Called COSI 2.
Called COSI 2, that asked the question beyond skincare alone, but asked, can skincare with coconut oil compared to just routine skincare with whatever the sites might be using as their local routine, does that reduce sepsis in preterm babies? I don't know the answer just yet. We're in the process of cleaning the data and analyzing it. But my take is, if it did, that'd be great. But even if it didn't, but provided us with good safety information, then this would support that we have something that we can use safely on preterm baby skin to support skin integrity. That in itself already would be a major breakthrough, because even at a global scale, there's nothing. There is nothing, no emollient, no oil for which we have safety data in small babies. So either way, it will be a very important outcome.
I think. Sorry, before you go on, a feature of the oil that you didn't really talk about that came out of COSI was just how compatible it was with the parents getting involved in the care of the baby. I mean, I think that's a really impactful part of the story. So maybe you can talk about that a bit in terms of...
Yeah, I mean, it has really a very good bonding capacity. Because imagine your baby is born extremely early, potentially quite unwell, in an incubator, largely separated from mum and dad, who may get to hold it briefly, sometimes not, for days. There's often very little the parents can do other than worry, and that's often what happens. Mums often bond somewhat better. They can express breast milk to feed the baby. But for the dad especially, there's often not much they can do. So we've really, in our unit, used the skincare aspect of what we provide to babies as an opportunity to get the parents more involved, especially also the dads. And literally, we commence skincare on the first day of life. So within hours of the baby being born, this starts, and we now take the oil application as a conduit to involving the parents and say, this is something you can do. We'll show you how to do it. We'll show dad how to do it. And it's really emerged as one of the positive and meaningful interactions they can have with their baby, where otherwise it's often pretty limited.
You can imagine, like, I don't know if this is more of a psychological study or not, but the connection, as you said, from paternal and maternal care with the baby has like a huge psychological effect with the baby as they grow up as well. Yeah. So that I could imagine that makes big differences, and that's what you're alluding to, right?
That's what I'm alluding to. But it's not. While the baby is always in our focus, it's also the parental mental health, because having a baby in the NICU is a challenge. Yeah, and there is not many live events that compare to that. It is similar in stress level that it causes to losing your job, or to have a serious illness, to any other family member, and gets close to losing your partner. That's how stressful it is to have a baby in the NICU. From a psychological perspective, it's a really big thing.
Oh, I could imagine it'd be the biggest thing for a parent. This is going to be a bit off topic, but what about like adults and children or young babies that aren't in NICU using coconut oil? Is that?
It's a really good question.
It is a good question, and we have looked at that as well, and we recently completed a pilot trial. So again, a smaller trial, really looking into feasibility and safety, but for a different question. And this trial involved young children between the ages of 1 to 6 with severe eczema to explore whether using coconut oil as an emollient on the eczema lesions compared to routine care would be not only safe but potentially beneficial. And what we found is that it works really well, was very acceptable to the parents. In fact, they preferred it over the other emollients they were using, and we're seeing really promising signals in terms of the bacteria we find on the skin that we know are often involved in the flare-ups of eczema. So it's not quite published yet. It's currently under review, so we can't say all of it.
Also, the oral mucositis.
Yes,
as well,
that's right. Yeah, and we again harnessing the potential antimicrobial effects in a vulnerable population, that is children that undergo chemotherapy for cancer. They often get ulceration of the mucosa in their mouth, and even down the esophagus, can be really debilitating, painful, and sometimes even therapy interrupting. So we explored whether washing the mouth, not swallowing it, but just washing your mouth every day with coconut oil may reduce harmful bacteria and help the mucosa to heal. And again, that went really well. And the early signals are that it's acceptable, and we're hoping to embark on a larger trial in the not too distant future.
And again, that's got parallels to just where this comes from, right? Because coconut oil pulling, which is what it's called in Southeast Asia, regular thing. People will swish their mouth out with coconut oil as a form of mouth care. Instead of Listerine, they'll swish some coconut oil in and spit it out. Yeah. So it's been known for millennia as well. So we're just replicating what, I guess, indigenous knowledge is, basically. Yeah. Anyway, and then there's also burns too, in pediatric burns. So as a skin protectant for burn site and graft sites as well. So yeah, we're definitely very aware of broader usages.
What about yourselves?
Yeah, I've used it on some.
Are you regularly using it though?
I don't, because I don't have a supply of the clinical trial product. If I had more of it, I probably would use it.
That one from Brisbane, it's not on the shelves. It is like
you can buy it online, but it's not in the supermarket. So you'd have to make a little bit more dedicated effort to get it, but you can.
Okay.
Yeah.
I'm not going to ask for it because just in case we don't want to take away from the supply
That's
of
right.
you guys. So, but
Well, it's a good point, right? Because it's not and I think this is what something that should come out is that it's a single source. It's one person and her connections. It's not a scalable opportunity to sort of supply Australia and even especially the world. So that became acutely aware to us during COSI too. We were doing this. We were translating it. Tobias was running the national trial. And we had anecdotal evidence coming in from people and parents. And we could start to see a future where we're like, holy crap, what happens at the end of the trial? Like, we just assumed in our mind that magically the trial would finish and then everyone would just start using coconut oil. But we realized there's just not the supply or the solution there. And so you can imagine now we've got this kind of ethical dilemma. Like, we've created a problem for which there's no solution, rather than a solution for which there's no problem, right? So we're now thinking, what do we do? And we talked to it's like what's the solution to this? So we get the guys in Fiji to try and ramp up. And in the end, I thought, we thought it's us. We've got to solve it. Like, it's our problem. We created it. We've got to solve it. So then we embarked on this translation phase of the COSI 2 project, which is, how do you get this stuff into routine care? And I think the solution was a company that's formed, which was basically a learning curve for us. We went in, again, probably another one of those beers or lunches where we said, let's just do it, commit to it. We will learn as we go. It'll become like an MBA by doing. So we will commit our own sweat and our own funds to it, and it'll become like our learning curve. And we started, 2 years ago? Seems agonizingly slow, and it's probably a reflection of the fact that we've had to learn so much. But at the same time, it's going quite quickly now too. So so we created a company, Vernico Pharmaceuticals. We did some training courses with some local entrepreneurial training sites. One of them was CERI, so the Centre for Entrepreneurial Research and Innovation. Fantastic, like 12-week course.
That's great.
Which was basically about just, if you've got a concept, the course was called Concept to Creation. If you've got a concept, then just get it done and create it. And the learning in that was really interesting. Like, it was, just stop dicking around, choose a name for a company, doesn't really matter. You might change it in the future. Choose a logo, doesn't matter. Just get stuff done. And so we did. So this course we created, Vernico Pharmaceuticals. Vernico comes from Vernix caseosum, which is when term babies are born, they're born with a sort of a white fatty layer on their skin, which protects them. Preterm babies aren't. And in some ways, coconut oil is just replacing Vernix. It's just replacing what normal term babies have. So Vernico is the Vernix company, really. Pharmaceuticals, because it sounds like it should be important. And we want to be in that space where it's regulated. And the way we went, and we won the People's Choice Award for our 5-minute pitch, which was $6,000. That's it. We incorporated it. We paid that. All 6,000 went into lawyers' fees, accountant fees. Accountants make a lot of money. I definitely went in the wrong field for making money. Accountants' fees, and we met this young guy who stuck with us. He was actually a PhD here at Murdoch and then a postdoc here, and had a real creative flair. And so he's come on to help us with some design elements. That was it. $6,000 snowballed into another big donation, an innovation booster grant from the state government. And now we have our own coconut oil packaging equipment, first of its kind in Australia, inside a facility that can manufacture pharmaceutical grade. It's up and running as of about a few weeks ago. We've got our artwork design, we've got copyright, we've got trademarks, we've got everything that we've learned, we've had to do. And now we feel so frustrated waiting for this all to come together. And we've found other sites to source the oil from, and other really good. And again, not surprisingly, the people that we found are people who want to work with the locals, be fair, sustainable. The locals care about their oil and their coconuts. And it's not surprising that's where the good quality oil is coming from. So we are so close. I'm not going to say when, because it just seems like it's 2 steps forward, 1 step back. But that's part of the learning curve. But we are so close for being able to solve this problem, at least for Australia at the scale that we're talking about. And then if things go bigger for eczema, we're going to have to solve those problems too. But it's really exciting. It's really humbling to realize just how little you know and out of our comfort zone, right? But what we've really found in that time is there's so many generous people, not just like generosity for donations, right? There's been some generous donations, but there are people who just sit down with you and have a coffee with you or a beer with you and give you advice or point you in a direction. And some of these people are, like we had a beer with a billionaire, right? We didn't know he was a billionaire when we had the beer, but he gave us his time for a good hour and we had a totally unassuming conversation, which ended in a thing of, what do you need? And we said, well, we need advice. We need people who can help us with supply. And he's like, well, come talk to me when you're ready, because I know supply chains and I know, that was a beer with a billionaire, right? So there's been a lot of generosity, I think, of people. So I'd say to people who are thinking about, like they've got a scientific innovation or concept, I would say just create it. Just get out there and create it and then talk to as many people as you can. In fact, have a beer with us. We're happy to have a beer with you too and tell you what we've learned about not what to do.
All the things we've done wrong.
Yeah, exactly. But we're still going. So, yeah, I think it's going to be exciting times. 2026 is going to be make or break for us. I think make. If break, that'll be disappointing, but we'll have learnt a lot for what we do next. But
you've got it. It's obviously fast tracking to something that's going to be huge. You've got the clinical trials. You're showing it's working. Sounds like you're so close.
Yeah, and it's got to look. Part of the slowness has been keeping ourselves grounded in. Look, it's got to be ethical. It's got to be sustainable. It's got to be safe.
It's got to be based in science.
It's going to be based in science. So we have to do it that way, which is interesting because, the TGA, so Therapeutics Good Administration, that regulates medicines and nutraceuticals and listed medicines, like all your herbal medicines in Australia. Interesting organisation. Doesn't know what to make of coconut oil. And we spent a lot of our time trying to understand what the TGA wants, and the TGA, I think, spent a lot of time trying to understand what they want and what we are, and to find what space we fit into. But I think we're there. We've come to consensus. They haven't been unhelpful. We're just in this kind of weird category of it's not medicine, it's not food. What is it, right? So, but that's fine. That means we're going to be probably in that first category. We might end up with our own category. In Japan, they have a category for it called functional food, which is basically a medicinal food. So ironically, the Japanese would get us no problems. But look, that's also been, we never thought that would be the case, right? We thought surely there'll be just a drop-down thing in the TGA that you select that category, and not that easy. So look, anyway, lots of
nothing
problems.
new is easy.
No. And
people don't like change.
And people, and that's right. And it goes back to what Tobias said right at the start. It's risk, right? So if you mention we want to put something on a baby that is not a food and not a medicine, that could be varied based on where it's grown. We can tell you some of the key ingredients, but we can't give you exact levels, just ranges. Of course, then they go, well, the hell is that? How do we regulate that, right? So, but that's on us. So what we've done is we've built the safety up front with, like Tobias said, designing the assays for what's in it, understanding the levels, putting a very strict criteria on what we want to accept as the quality, and effectively create our own standard, right? It's really our own standard that we'll hold ourselves to. And that will be important because I'm sure there'll be competitors and copiers who come in, but they'll be held to the same standard too, right? So in 5 years' time, let's fast forward, this is not us solving the problem by delivering coconut oil to every baby in Australia and the world. Fine. But if they're doing it at the standard we created, then at least we've solved the problem the way we wanted it, right?
Got to think big picture.
It'd be nice if it was us. I mean, it would be nice, but look, realistic.
It's a good way to look at it. And I think that's in the environmental side of the way. So I think we're all fighting for the same goal. And it's people, sometimes it's people's egos get in the way for collaborations and things.
Yeah.
But the fact that you're looking at it to solve the bigger picture, the bigger goal, that's the right way. And I Yeah, this has been remarkable to hear this and see this, basically learn something that's going to potentially change the world for like the first time is crazy. Like this is, I don't think people quite understand when this episode comes out, you're listening to something that's fresh, that's new, that can potentially be changing, and just sitting here potentially through a major breakthrough, which is pretty amazing. So I want to say thank you so much for coming to join and take the time to come here. I know you guys are very, very busy.
Yeah.
It was
it's been great.
A lot of organising to find time.
Thanks for being a good host and dragging it out of us too. It's good.
Yeah, well, when I spoke to you about it, I wasn't going to let it slide. Then
no.
It was we found a time that we're all free and we got it. So no, thank you so much for joining.
Yeah, cheers. Thanks.
Really hope to see where this goes out next.
Cool. Thanks.
Paramount importance. This production was recorded at the podcast studios in the Media Arts Centre at Murdoch University. The views and opinions expressed in this podcast are solely those of the hosts and guests and do not necessarily reflect the official policy or position of Murdoch University. Any content provided by the hosts and guests are their personal opinions and are not intended to represent the views or opinions of the university, its administration, faculty, or staff.